publish SoCal Water Wars on Substack at SoCalWaterWarsSubstack.com. And this is my podcast, Fire and Rain, the future of water and civilization on planet Earth. Decades ago, when I was working as a researcher and organizer for the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union in Orange County, I learned a lesson that shaped the rest of my political life. I saw firsthand how leaders of business unions often aligned themselves with leaders of the Democratic Party in ways that enriched themselves while crushing the aspirations of the workers they claimed to represent. That dynamic, where working class hopes were managed, redirected, or suppressed by party and union leaders for the sake of stability and capital, made it clear to me that neither business unions nor elected leaders or our democratic republic could be relied upon to challenge the system that empowered them. It also became clear that we could not simply outvote or outmaneuver these forces within the electoral structures they had built and controlled to their personal advantage. If voting alone was not enough to shift the balance of power, then what would? My conclusion at the time was that meaningful change would require a deeper transformation, one driven upward from the bottom of society. In my mind, that path looked like this: educate, agitate, organize with the working class while building the capacity for massive rolling strikes and boycotts. Only through that collective action, I believe, could we create the conditions for a political system in which elections truly reflect the will of the people and which elected officials would act according to that will. My guest today is Kshama Sawant, an unapologetic Marxist, Trotskyist, and revolutionary socialist who proved at least part of my theory to be incorrect. Indeed, the voters elected her to the Seattle City Council in 2013, a victory that was widely regarded as a breakthrough against America's corrupt duopoly run by the Democratic and Republican parties. During her 10 consecutive years on the council, Sawant and her grassroots activist movement pursued nonviolent class struggle through electoral politics and activism that produced a series of high-profile wins, even as major corporate and political interests spent heavily to stop her. Those victories included the successful fight to create Seattle's $15 an hour minimum wage in 2014, making it the first U.S. city to adopt a living wage for most of its workers, and landmark tenant protection laws, a tax on Amazon and other large corporations to fund affordable publicly owned housing. Her movement defeated well-funded recall and opposition campaigns to oust her, backed by some of the wealthiest interests in the region, including Jeff Bezos. Repeatedly, Sawant and Seattle's revolutionary socialist movement demonstrated that disciplined, organized working class pressure, including elections, could force concessions from political and corporate power that were previously considered impossible to obtain. Those victories were an inspiration to progressive activists across America, but far from being a complete revolution. Thus, Kshama retired from the city council at the end of her last term in office in 2023 to build a national movement through workers' strike back. She is currently running for Congress against Adam Smith, a 28-year veteran of the House and a conservative Democrat. So you can correct me if I got anything wrong there. But welcome to SoCal Water Wars and Fire and Rain.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pardon me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Okay, great. Okay. I wanted to. I would like to ask you to start out by defining the terms that you use to describe your political philosophy and organizing strategy, and the often the confrontational or class struggle, I guess you put it, tactics that come out of that. Many Americans like me, who grew up in the 50s and 60s, way before Bernie Sanders, thought of Marxism as a form of totalitarianism versus the supposed freedom of democratic capitalism, including its so-called free market. And they thought of Stalin and pre-Gorbachev, the Soviet Union, Mao Zedong, and North Korea, and so on. So for your purposes, what exactly does it mean that you are a Marxist, Trotskyite, revolutionary socialists, and what would an ideal socialist revolutionary state look like to you?
I think the starting point is that would make sense to the majority of people is what the majority of working class people across the world, including in America, are already noticing, which is that the system around them is simply not working for them. You don't have to be an economist to note, and as tens of millions of Americans have noted, that the massive proportions of wealth that is created in society by working people going to work every day, working hard every day, sometimes at more than one job just to make ends meet, but that collective labor generates massive amounts of wealth, and most of that wealth is siphoned off by a few billionaires and multimillionaires at the top, and while the rest of us are struggling even more than we were, perhaps, even as recently as 5 years ago, most of us are struggling even more than we were to put food on the table, to keep a roof over our heads and our families' heads, and to just make ends meet. The cost of living crisis is forcing people into such unprecedented precarious situations that overall I think it's a real indictment of the system around us, that despite more and more wealth being created, and despite the United States being the richest country in the history of humanity, more and more people are being pushed into extreme margins of what is possible to live on. And so that starting point also, explains to us that actually it shouldn't be this way, and we need something better. And I think there's a real search for alternatives. And that alternative, in my view, can only be based on the idea of working people, billions of working class people across the planet owning and controlling the resources of the planet. And the simple reason why we need that shift to happen is that you can't control what you don't own. So for example, we can talk about the climate catastrophe, the impending climate catastrophe, and how to avert it. We can talk about how it makes sense to use renewable energy, all of that. We can keep talking about that endlessly. However, we, meaning working class people, have no ability to change society in the direction away from fossil fuel use and towards clean, safe, renewable energy, because we don't control these massive corporations, not only the fossil fuel corporations. I'm also talking about all the big Wall Street banks that do the financial underwriting of these fossil fuel companies, and the billionaire and multimillionaire class as a whole globally, who all, regardless of which specific company they might have been a CEO of, or whatever, regardless, the entire billionaire and multimillionaire class profits from the climate crisis, from massive amounts of poverty, from exploiting and oppressing billions of workers, and from imperialist wars and genocide. And so that big shift that needs to happen, where we as the working class needs to have a democratic ownership over the world's resources, that, in other words, is socialism. And yes, what we want is a democratic society, and the glimpse of what possibilities exist for that society are to be seen from what happened in Russia right after the 1917 Russian Revolution, which was a genuine workers' revolution, and in my view, the most progressive event by far in modern human history. And that revolution was led by Lenin and Trotsky and so many of the countless Bolshevik leaders and the working class of Russia. And what they did was not only overthrow the monarchy, but they also overthrew the capitalist system and established what is genuinely is workers' government, or workers' state, or in other words, socialism. And what that achieved was something that capitalism will never be able to deliver, meaning a decent and high standard of living for all ordinary people, regardless of who you are, regardless of what work you do. You get high quality housing, healthcare, food. Uh, you know, um, Anti-Semitism was actually criminalized. That was the first country in which it was actually the freedom of religion. It was also the first country where homosexuality was decriminalized. It was the first country where women got the right to vote, years before any Western nation, any nation under capitalism gave women the right to vote. So all of these things are possible. All of these things, the majority of people agree with. The majority of the working class in America is well to the left of the politics that's on offer. And that is why, as we have seen through our elections in Seattle, calling myself a socialist was never a barrier to get elected. It was never a barrier to be able to win over masses of workers to fight for the demands like we did to win the nation's highest minimum wage and the Amazon tax and unprecedented renters' rights. This is what working people want. In fact, the dirty word is the C word, capitalism. And that is why I think there's never been, in my 18 years of activism, there's never been a more auspicious occasion than right now to fight for these things, because the majority of people agree with us.
Okay, so practically speaking, though, how does that apply here to the United States? For example, you're talking about public ownership. So give some concrete examples of that. How about public ownership of something like Amazon, or or the nationalization of oil, or whatever? You understand what I'm getting at there.
Yes. So first of all, just to look at what we already see through some form of public ownership. I mean, we cannot have genuine public ownership on the basis of capitalism, because in reality, the capitalist system is such that, as I said, the top extremely rich people, they control society, which means they own all the corporations, the resources. They own practically every square inch of the planet, and they are also, because of their disproportionate wealth and power, that also means that the vast majority of the political systems are under their control. So in the United States, both the Democratic and Republican Party are represented, even despite their superficial differences, are both dogged representatives of the capitalist class. And so the institutions, the criminal justice system, all of these are set up to protect the wealth of the capitalist state, not of ordinary people. It's meant to protect billionaires from the anger of working class people. So in that context, it is difficult to point out specific, actual examples of actual public ownership, because you can't have that under capitalism. We need to overthrow capitalism in order to make that happen. However, having said that, I think there are aspects today which have been won, victories that have been won through militant labor action in the past, that we can see examples of actually working for working people. So, for example, one of the victories of the whole period of militant labor action in the 30s and 40s was the New Deal. The New Deal was not something that FDR, graciously handed to the working class out of his benevolence. The New Deal was a concession from the capitalist class, wrested from them, wrenched from them by militant labor movements, especially the 1934 Minneapolis General Strike, which was actually led by Trotskyist labor leaders, by Marxist labor leaders. But as part of that New Deal, what did we win? We won many things. The working class won many things. We won, for example, publicly owned affordable housing, much of that which has been destroyed by now. But my point is that you even under capitalism, you can see when there's militant working class action, you can actually win something that capitalism otherwise doesn't provide, which is affordable, high quality housing that was actually available to us, a proportion of working class people. And that meant that housing, those homes were not meant as sources of profit for a few billionaires and multimillionaires. It was meant to be rent controlled. It was meant to be affordable. By law, if you were a tenant in those publicly affordable homes, you could not be charged any more than 30% of your income. So it was by definition affordable. So that's a concrete example of what is possible. And yes, in terms of what it would look like for Amazon, for example, to be taken into democratic ownership, absolutely, Amazon needs to be taken into democratic ownership. All the big corporations need to be. And what it would look like concretely, just a couple of things to mention. First of all, absolutely the first starting point would be the exploitation of the workers at Amazon would come to a complete standstill. The exploitation would be ended, because the whole point of exploitation, and it is grotesque, it is Dickensian, the exploitation that goes on of Amazon warehouse workers, but workers are literally dying on the shop floor because they are not even given bathroom breaks. They are not given allowed to have ambulance services there to take them into, for treatment because of the heart problems they have due to overheating, due to overexertion, due to carrying boxes all day long. All of that would end. And in fact, democratically, the working class could agree that we don't want any section of our workforce to be exploited. We actually want to run this company for the good of society, which includes the good of the workers.
Okay, when you're talking about and going back to FDR, the public ownership, you're talking about rentals, or you're talking about actually owning the homes. Who actually? I mean, and in your housing program that you got passed, which taxes Bezos and other billionaires, and provides, my understanding is, what, 250 or so million a year for affordable housing, publicly owned affordable housing. What does that publicly owned actually mean? I mean, who literally, and are they homes or are they rentals? Is this are they any of them homes that people actually own themselves? And then what about the issue of selling that or to back to some profit mongering corporation and so on.
Yeah, all of these, when I talk about public housing, I mean rental, but it's not rental. That's why I was making a distinction. It's not rental as in you are, as a tenant, you and your family are at the mercy of your rapacious landlord corporation. It is rental as in it is permanent. You don't have to move. Once you're there, you shouldn't have to move because why should anybody have to move? We should have enough housing for everyone. And if a family wants to stay want to live in that house for their entire life, they should be allowed to. That there's enough, more than enough housing that is there already available and can be built. The obstacle is not the physical availability or the physical ability to build affordable housing. The obstacle is capitalism. The reason we don't have affordable housing is not because we don't have enough land or building material or construction workers. The obstacle is that the billionaire class, Wall Street, all of these these obscenely rich individuals, they want to make yet another dollar off our backs by exploiting us not only as workers but also as working class tenants. And that is why the experience of most working class and most working people, when I say working class, I don't just mean poor working class people. I mean anybody who needs to go uh, to work in order to pay their bills. If you don't need to go to work to pay your bills, or if you didn't retire as a working class person, who went to work for 40 years, then you're a capitalist. You have enough equity to live on. You've had enough equity to live on all your life. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about working people, which means it includes well-paid tech workers and also baristas and retail workers who get paid probably the minimum wage. And so for working class people, the public housing has been a lifeline to the extent that working people got any access to it, because it is permanently, it can be permanently a home if you wish it. I mean, if you want to move, you can move, but you can have it permanently for rent controlled rates, meaning you don't get exploited. You only pay what you are able to, which is less than 30, no more than 30% of your rent. So
So
in
you
that
can't get
sense,
evicted for being a
no.
bad tenant or
Well,
something. Yeah.
okay, I'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
The statistics, we cannot frame eviction in by saying bad tenants, honestly, John, because yes, obviously, I'm sure there are some bad tenants, but the vast majority of evictions don't take place because you're a bad tenant. They take place because you're a poor tenant. They take place because maybe you're not even poor, but that month you had a medical crisis, and because of the healthcare being in shambles in the United States, even going to the emergency could cost you thousands of dollars. And emergency treatment could put you in debt for tens of thousands of dollars. And if you don't pay 1 month's rent, then you go into massive arrears because many of these landlord corporations have insane rules. Like if you are short paying your rent a given month because you don't have money, that's the reason you are short on paying rent. You don't have money, then they'll slap on something insane like $75 fine per day or something like that, and or $50 a fine a day, which is completely insane because by the time you're able to cobble together money, even if it's a few weeks, you're already so much more in debt than you were on day one. And so actually the victory that we won in Seattle is a super crucial victory, which is, one of the many, many renters' rights we won. One of those was a $10 cap on late rent fee. I mean, the corporate landlords absolutely hated it because they don't get that source of profit is closed off for them in Seattle. If you're a tenant in Seattle, renter in Seattle, and if you're short on your rent and you fail to pay your rent in a given month, you can only be charged $10. Period. $10 absolutely. Period. No, no more. So I think
10%, 10%, right?
no, $10.
I'm sorry, maybe I misheard. For a rental increase?
No. If you fail to pay your rent,
Okay, I see. Okay.
the late fees that you can be charged is only $10.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was focusing in my mind on the rent, the increase of rent when when a lease is run out, and so like down here, I think they have a 10% a year is the highest they can go, but that practically kills us every time that we have.
Yeah. 10% is not rent control. That's what Washington State Democrats have done. Oh, no, I'm talking about a different law which says that
Okay,
if you are late in paying your rent, your landlord can only charge you $10 extra. This is
yeah,
a crucial lifeline. This has prevented, I'm sure, I mean, there's no study I can point to, but um, anecdotally speaking, I can tell you it has prevented evictions many times over because if $10 you can cobble it together and then still remain in your home. So in reality, evictions are not because you're quote unquote bad. The vast majority of evictions happen because you're poor or you had a really bad month in terms of medical expenses or something like that. And so as far as who owns these rental homes, publicly owned homes, they are currently, that's why I started by saying that you can't actually have public ownership of any real kind on the basis of capitalism, because capitalism is a system where the vast majority of resources are owned in the hands of a few billionaires and multimillionaires. But within that framework, you can still make headway if you're willing to fight for working class people, as we have in Seattle. Unfortunately, we are the unique example. But though this housing is affordable, but it is not publicly owned, as in it is still owned by the capitalist state. But but by law they cannot turn it over to corporate landlords. If they wanted to turn the public housing into corporate landlords, they would need actual legislation. They would need to actually announce it, all of that. So just to give you a concrete example, in New York City, there is still remaining public housing, the single largest example of public housing that was built through the militant labor victories in the 1940s and 50s was built in New York. And and there was public housing in Seattle too. There still is. There's still public housing in Minneapolis, Philadelphia, many cities, but all of it is dwindling because this is what happens under capitalism. When you win some reforms, those reforms are, the capitalist class tries to snatch them away if they are able to. So ultimately, you cannot stop there. You have to go towards fundamental shift away from capitalism itself. In any case, in New York, what is happening right now under a socialist mayor, Zoran Mamdani, democratic socialist, self-described democratic socialist Mamdani, is actually a massive betrayal of the working class, where there is 5 million rental homes of public housing, meaning they're affordable housing. They are all now set to be demolished and privatized. And in fact, once the demolition happens, only a fraction of them will remain in terms of public housing. Most of it will go into the hands of private equity.
That's his policy. That's
it's not the policy. It's not a policy that he advocated for. That process started before him. However, as a Marxist, I would have moved heaven and earth, built movements to stop that demolition from happening.
Okay.
But he is not doing that. He has said that he's going to go ahead with the demolition.
Well, that raises a question I want to ask about, and you can talk about in just a minute about how you actually got those reforms and what you had to do, the class struggle you actually had to go through to get that. But what about? I want to ask first about what about the people who are renting homes? Okay, they're like we're doing here in San Diego. So you're renting a home, living with family members and so on. and which many people do down here, and they're owned by private owners, not by corporate entities. However, they're managed by corporate real estate firms, and they tack on all kinds of fees and what have you. And then there's this 10%. They can go up 10% every time, and of course the rent increases have gone up far, as you know, and as every renter knows, far more than the rate of inflation for everything else. And so how what so we have to go through this every year or 2 years at the most. We'll see this time. We're going on 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen. And searching for some place. And collectively, we can afford things, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to find it. And there's the whims of the corporate management, and they tack on all these fees on top of that. So the rent might be 4,000 for a four-bedroom house, but then with your pet fee, your pesticide fee, your credit improvement fee, all this kind of crap they put on there, it comes up to about another $400 or so on. So how does the reforms you got in Seattle there, how do they address those kind of rentals? Like it's actually home. We got a yard and all that kind of stuff, and that's what we're renting, and many people are renting here. Does it apply to situations like that?
Well, one of the many, many renters' rights we won was this victory in 2016, which we call the move-in fee cap and payment plan. It's not a very nifty name; it's a bit of a mouthful, but it is a very, very important law which actually has demonstrably improved the lives of renters in a significant way, and prevented working class renters from having to move all the time, and also the costs that are associated with moving. So what this move-in fee cap and payment plan legislation does is it says that it actually directly addresses exactly the kind of problem you were talking about, John, where these corporate management corporations, they landlord corporations or managers, they tack on fee after fee after fee, this fee, that fee, and so on. And then before you know it, you are out just unbelievable amounts of money. And in fact, as a lot of people testified when we were fighting for this legislation, just moving into a place is so exploitatively expensive. And so this legislation caps the combined security deposits and non-refundable fees to no more than 1 month's rent. This is a huge difference. It's absolutely a night and day difference from what it was before, where it's like you said, it's unlimited amounts of fees that the landlords can charge. So combined security deposits and non-refundable fees cannot exceed 1 month's rent. The non-refundable fees themselves are capped at no more than 10% of the first month's rent. And pet deposits are capped at 25% of 1 month's rent. Further, the payment plan part of the legislation says that landlords must allow tenants to pay security deposits, non-refundable fees, and last month's rent over time, meaning you don't have to pay it all at once, you have time to pay it. So for leases of 6 months or longer, you get 6 months of installments. For shorter leases, it's 4 months. Sorry, I'm getting into details, but the point is that all the fees that you need to pay, all the junk fees, first of all, junk fees are eliminated. The remaining fees are capped at a minimum. And furthermore, you have a whole period of time over which you can pay that legally. You don't have to produce $5,000 to $8,000 just to move into a place, which is what used to be required. And this, most of the renters' rights we won, John, all of them were challenged in the courts by corporate landlords. Every single one of them has been upheld. And they are extremely popular. And just to tell you one other story, last year, the Seattle City Council, which are all Democrats, I was on the Seattle City Council until December 2023. I was the only socialist, the lone socialist, independent socialist. They were always all Democrats. And right now, it's all Democrats. So last year, the all Democrat Seattle City Council attempted to undermine all these renters that we won, through one omnibus bill. They tried to do that. We, meaning my organization, Workers Like That, which I launched to be, to build, to use the strategy, the class struggle strategy we used in Seattle to bring it nationally. Workers strike back, and I demobilized working class renters to City Hall last year, and we fought that. And not only did we force the Democrats in City Council to completely back off on their attempted attack on our renters' rights, what happened also is that that particular council member, Kathy Moore is her name, who brought that legislation, she was so shamed that she ended up resigning because of that.
Well, well, down here is a similar situation. We have a democratically controlled city council. There are a couple of Republicans, I think, but this is a firm Democratic area here. I'd say it's a thin blue line, actually. But these reforms you're talking about, they apply to corporate owned rental facilities, right?
No, they apply to all.
Okay. So if there's somebody who, for example, um, I would distinguish between a real ma and pa group who are renting their loft in the garage above the garage or whatever out to the people who have uh, they own 3 or 4 homes and they're renting them out, and it's privately owned, but it's managed by a corporation. So we have some reforms that have been similar, not as intense, implemented down here, but they don't apply to any privately owned home. They only apply to corporate rentals. So many of the rentals here are from people who you're renting from people who own several homes, like they're they're living in Hawaii perhaps, and they're renting. They got a couple of houses here, and they're renting out those homes. And so there's that issue. And so how do you deal with that? I mean, I don't know what the percentage of this difference is around the country, but I know here, I mean, there are tons of these rentals that we look through every time we search, online, Zillow and all that kind of stuff. And, so there must be a hell of a lot of them. That must make up a large percentage for families, especially.
So, first of all, I think more and more rental homes are actually being owned by what is called private equity, which is somewhat of a misleading name because it's not private, as in it's not small and mom and pop. It's Wall Street corporations. They are the ones who own private equity, and these are basically corporations. It's almost like almost like fake corporations, because what do they do? All they do is exploit the renters and the tenants, and they make big bucks for the people who own these corporations, who have nothing to do with, they're not providing housing or anything. They're just making money. That's what it's, a money making venture. It's not a housing providing it's not a housing providing venture of any kind.
Supplement their retirement of a couple.
No, I'm not talking about retirement, John. I'm talking about the billionaires and multimillionaires. They don't need to exploit any person anymore. Like, they have these people. I'm talking about people who increased their wealth by nearly $5 trillion in the last 10 years. That's who I'm talking about. I'll come to the mom and pop landlord, your question, small landlord. I'll come to that in a second. But I'm just saying that, first of all, the the more and more rental housing is being owned by these Wall Street firms. Blackstone, BlackRock. They are starting to own more and more of the housing, and they are the ones who actually are the most rapaciously exploitative of renters. So if you look at the statistics, like, for example, there's one statistic that shows that um, eviction rates go up when housing is grabbed up by these Wall Street firms, and these corporations end up owning them. So because the reason they're doing evictions at a faster rate is not because they're bad tenants. It's because that's what makes them money. They get renters to move out, and then new tenants at a higher rent, and so on and so on. It's just a money minting machine for them. It is absolutely ruthless, and it is inhumane. And this is the best case that you can make for democratic public ownership of all housing corporations. But as far as small landlords are concerned, yeah, I mean, I will say two things. One is that if you look at it, I mean, just on a whole basis, I don't think every small landlord is a good person. I think they also do their own share of exploitation. But the point is that there are many small landlords who don't exploit their tenants, because for them it is like, there are many landlords for whom, and I know some of them, who for whom it's just retirement income. It really is just additional income. They themselves often are working class people, and they worked all their life, and this is a little bit more that they use to supplement for their retirement, because retirement is so goddamn expensive, and we are all exploited. That is a different thing. If you're not exploiting your tenant, then these laws don't make a difference to you. If you're not increasing your tenant's rent by 10% or something ridiculous like that, then a rent control law won't affect you. My point is that if you're not exploiting your tenant, then none of these laws are applicable to you in any case, because you're not doing those things that the laws are meant to prohibit. You see what I mean? So that is one thing. And the other thing I would say, that having said that, I think the law should apply to everyone, in the sense that if a landlord is exploiting a tenant, it doesn't matter whether it's a small landlord or a big landlord. Nobody has the right to exploit working people. So I don't care if it's a small or medium sized landlord who's exploiting the tenant, the law should apply to them also. But like I said, I have never heard of a actual small landlord who exploits their tenants. I've not never heard that. In reality, I've only heard of exploitation by corporations. And I'll also say another thing that you should be wary of. There are a lot of companies that say that they are small landlords, but then when you scratch under the surface, you'll find out that they are just shell corporations for a big company. In fact, there is a landlord called Carl Hageland here in Seattle, who goes around pretending he's a small landlord, but then you find out he owns just dozens upon dozens of buildings, and he gravely exploits his tenants. And we actually won a victory against him and all landlords like him. We ended up calling the law the Carl Hageland law. He got the he got the honor of being named as the bad landlord for whom this law was created. And that law says that no landlord has the right to increase rents while they have outstanding code violations, meaning when there are code violations that they have failed to address or refused to address. And the reason this law came about, John, is because this guy, Carl Hageland, his tenants came to my office and told us about, and we visited these buildings. They told us how he had the shamelessness to increase their rents by 100%, meaning doubling their rents, while he had refused to address the conditions in the apartment buildings. I mean, they were deplorable conditions. There was mold infestation. The children there had developed early onset asthma because of the mold infestation. The windows would not close. It was the cold season. There was no temperature control. The sinks were not working. The stoves were not working. Anyway, so these are the kinds of landlords we're talking about.
Uh-oh. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I had a little blackout here, but it's okay, I guess. All right. Well, okay, so let's talk about the struggle, that part of it. So, we had a supervisor, county supervisor's race here, where last year, where my city council representative, a Democrat for the city of San Diego, was holding a town, some kind of town hall or whatever. Actually, it was a free breakfast at IHOP or something. So I went there kind of with a chip on my shoulder already, because I was sick and tired of all this talk about doing something about affordable housing in this city and in cities around, like Chula Vista, where we all also lived, pretty large city, and I was sick and tired of it, of all this talk about affordable housing, when they're always touting these developments down here, and sometimes built by big backers of the mayor, a Democrat, and they're just saying, oh, they come with affordable housing. Well, there's just a tiny percentage of them that are affordable, and most of those affordable are in the upper here in California. But I don't know what the standards are affordable. The income race standards are for affordable housing in Washington, but here there's like a 3-tier system, I guess. And so it's almost never for the very poor. There's just a few here and there, like it's like finding caves in the mountains or something. And and there are these big luxury. Most of the vast majority of 95 or 98% of the units are these luxury apartments and condos that are just hugely expensive. And and so I just thought it's just a big phony thing. And we have housing nonprofits down here, some of whom I think do some good work, and others which purport to help the working class people and build maybe 10 or 14 or so affordable housing units on their own, but and are getting all their funding from the city council, basically, of San Diego and so on. And I see them as part of the problem. And they're getting involved in some of these affordable housing scams. And that's why I asked the council member. I said, "Are you?" I talked about the struggles that our families had to go through, and how maddening, how stressful that is. And I asked her. I said, "Are you at least long last ready to at least say or to codify the that there is a human right to affordable housing? Uh, we have a human right to water, supposedly, at least implied, and so on, and in many cases, not in Washington, by the way, but and not really here, but we have environmental justice standards and so on, and we talk about rhetorically the human right to water, and United Nations, I believe, recognizes that. Um, so I said, are you willing to do that? At least say that. At least get it down there. I know that's just a start, but so at least it gives you a guidepost, for future legislation and policy." And she basically, make a long story short, she got rather pissed off. I said, "Well, that's not for me. I can't do that. That's a national thing or a state thing, and all this." And so it's pretty outrageous. This this these affordable housing, these projects to get more units. We got to get more units built. We got to get more units built. And there are too many regulations that are stopping that. We've got to streamline the regulations. We've got to so on and so forth. And that's why people are leaving California. We're not building enough homes. But the homes that they do build are the homes, yeah, and the rental units are way too expensive for most people. And so we have a huge homeless problem down here and so on. And a lot of that, I think, is related to people just can't, the poorest can't afford it. So there's this problem with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They can't seem to get past that. The idea that it's or to the point that they can say at least it's a human right. And I don't know if you have something like that in Seattle, but don't you think it should be recognized officially as a human right, at least to get things started?
Absolutely, it should be recognized. But like you said, water is recognized as a right, but we are having increasing problems with water access across the country and across the world. I mean, there are massive water problems in my home country, India, in Latin America, and all of it, as you say in your own Substack articles, that it is all linked with the way resources are gobbled up by the billionaire class under capitalism. And that will absolutely need socialism in order to solve the problems. And the only basis on which we can have actual access to all our basic needs for the billions of people on the planet, not to mention the rights of other animals, the sustainability of the planet. The only basis to do that is to overthrow capitalism globally and replace it with socialism, or, as I said, democratic ownership of all the resources. But so yeah, I mean, yes, it should be, but even if, I mean, first of all, the response that you got from that Democrat, that is really typical. It shows you that, it's another example of how the Democratic Party represents the billionaire class just as much as the Republicans do. They're only going to say a few progressive things when they feel under pressure, but when they are not, when they feel the cameras are off or whatever, they'll speak exactly like a Republican. And so they know they don't want to codify it in the law as a human right to housing, because then that will put whatever little bit of pressure that ends up putting, they don't want that pressure. And as a matter of fact, we do have these kinds of arguments in Seattle as well. In fact, a big part of the housing activist movement, if you want to call it that, were very much susceptible to this a false idea that, oh, well, we should just we need to deregulate the market. It's because these corporations, construction companies face too many regulations that they are not able to build housing, and then if you build more, then you'll have more housing. And it's a completely fallacious argument. I mean, I say that both as a Marxist and as an economist, that this type of supply argument is actually completely fallacious. It's completely false, because the fact is exactly what you said, John. Is the question is affordability. You can build as many rental units as you can. If a construction company can make profits off it, developers will, the corporate developers will build them. The point is that home going to be affordable to the vast majority of people? And if the answer is no, then no amount of such housing built is going to solve the affordability crisis, because the affordability crisis is not because there are too few homes. The affordability crisis is because the only model in which capitalism is willing to give housing is when it makes massive profits to all kinds of people at the top, which includes the developers, all the construction companies, the associated, the general contractor companies, the, the corporate landlords, the Wall Street banks. I mean, there's a whole pipeline of parasites under capitalism who are going to provide housing only on the basis that they get to suck the lifeblood out of the millions of working class people. So no, that model does not work. And in fact, you can see the evidence for it. In that type of argument is gaining less traction now because in Seattle, because people have seen the evidence. Seattle has been the construction crane capital for many years running. And yet, during that same period, housing actually became markedly less affordable. Rents were skyrocketing at the same time that newer and newer and newer units were being built. And for ordinary people, ordinary people don't need a PhD in economics to know that this is not working, that the reason they don't have affordable rents is because landlords are exploiting them. And the only way to have affordable housing is for working class people to actually change the balance of power through movement building and actually win something, which is why the renters' rights that we won in Seattle, John, they are unique in many ways. Because the whole suite of renters' rights is very unique, and that because the reason we won it was through a class struggle based strategy. So it was not so much that it's electoral. I don't make such distinction between electoral versus otherwise. I mean, in my view, that's a false dichotomy. In my view, the most fundamental question is what are the avenues available to us for building class struggle based fighting strategy in order to win, in order to mobilize masses of people to win big historic victories. And we saw our, this election, the city council office that we won as an avenue to build that type of struggle. We didn't see that as, oh, it's electoral and that's why it works or something like that. No, the reason we used it was because that was the only avenue available to us to put forward this strategy, because tragically, the labor leadership in the United States right now is in such a sorry state. I mean, overwhelmingly, they subscribe to what you call and what I also call business unionist ideas, which is trying to make peace with the bosses, trying to make peace with capitalism, which also means making peace with the Democratic and Republican parties. And the fact that the labor leaders are business unionists also means that they act as gatekeepers against any kind of movement, which is why we are not seeing, despite the anger against the war on Iran, against the genocide, against Trump's ICE terror, despite all the anger at the cost of living crisis, at the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, the anger at the healthcare shambles, the anger at the fact that 300,000 federal public sector workers were laid off last year, which was the single biggest attack on the union movement. There is anger against all of this, and yet you don't have movements that have been able to win any victories against Trump. And that is because those policies of Trump are bipartisan and they are shared by the Democratic Party as well. And because the labor leadership is mainly tied to the Democratic Party, in addition to being tied to the bosses, the labor leaders have acted as a gatekeepers against any type of militant struggle. So the question for me and my fellow revolutionary socialists was not electoral or something else. It was, what is the avenue available to us to bring forward the counter to the business unionist ideas? And this was one of the avenues available for us. And that is why we are also running for Congress now. And we are, in terms of housing, we are calling for national rent control, and we are calling for taxes on the rich to fund a massive expansion of publicly owned, affordable, rent controlled housing.
Okay. So I wanted to get to talk about water a little bit here because I'm always perplexed why water isn't uh, a major issue in any national campaign or region, any campaign actually. And people know so little about it in general. They know some of the bigger issues now, but um, not a lot. And you talk about the profit motive, and to me, have affordable housing, we have to defang the profit motive. Uh, but in water, presumably, at least in California, and I think most of the United States, it's not generally not considered a for-profit pursuit. Although there are lots of ways that uh, corporations make profit off of that. Teaming up with public water agencies to build massive projects, for example. I think I wrote you a little bit about this, the desalination issue, the huge ocean desalination plant that we have in San Diego County, which was actually a, a, a big corporate project that was a multinational project. That was all the aspects of it, the getting of the loans and the grants and everything from the government and so on was all these, the whole process, everything was all very complicated, but all divided up into sections that were basically sold off to investors and from all over the world. And then there's another kind of profit. It's the agencies themselves who get these projects built at huge debt to the ratepayers who they have to raise rates to pay for these things. And when they could just conserve and get water that way, or build wastewater treatment plants, which are expensive but much cheaper than ocean desal and so on. I'm just giving you one example. You can think of others, but corporations are involved in this process all the time. If you go to any water summit or forum put on by sponsored in part by local water agencies or the bigger ones like the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, one of the biggest agencies in the world, or the San Diego one, which is a huge one too. You'll see it's always sponsored by corporations, water corporations, IDE maybe from Israel, or it could be whatever. In fact, there's a big influence in Israel water corporations here, and they own the desal plant in Carlsbad. So we managed to stop the one that was identical to it that was going to be built in Huntington Beach. It's the exact same, it was a clone basically, and that was through a cross, talking about struggle, a little different than what you're talking about, but still it was a cross section of environmentalists, just NIMBYs, and all kinds of people were in there. And it evolved into a statewide thing, which defied the governor and so on, and built or stopped the last one. But so we have problems in Washington, California, the Colorado River Basin, and everything with uh, less accessible water due to climate change. And at the same time, there's this dichotomy between this battle between, to make it simple, conservationists and the abundance crowd. And you have this going on. I know a little bit, did a little research on Washington as an equivalent to it. So one says keep building, 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 and growing, and water will come. Water will follow the plow. That was the saying that helped develop the West and get people to come out here. And it didn't always work, hence the dams and so on that have screwed up our environment, our water environment. So uh, I I'm hoping that these issues can. Right now, we have, for example, a huge issue, and it's influenced by Trump. It's influenced by the federal level. It's influenced by the state level. It's influenced by big ag down here in California, especially, who grow wasteful crops, sell them abroad, and get free water from the public to do this. And then when we ask them to conserve, they they say, "Well, pay us, so much an acre, a big price for every acre foot of water, and then we'll conserve." So it's just this. So there is this constant corporate influence everywhere. So then we see the water being weaponized, of course, and I think you kind of alluded to that in Israel during the genocide, and way before that, as a tool of ethnic cleansing for the Palestinians. We see desalination plants and other water infrastructure being threatened in the war in Iran, in the Persian Gulf with Iran, and so on. So I don't know. What is your general response to all this? And the fact that, like, I don't know how it is exactly. I imagine it's probably pretty much the same. You go to your local water district, it's not very transparent. You go to the larger water districts that are kind of the umbrella agencies for the smaller ones that sell them imported water and so on. And they're not even elected officials, they're appointed officials. So, what's your kind of analysis, thinking locally and internationally about the democracy, the need to democratize water, and keep the profit motive out of it? Because we know where privatization has interfered in this country and other countries, it's been a disaster, especially for the poor. So, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, just to echo what you were saying, John, privatization has indeed been a complete disaster, and water is one example of privatization becoming a disaster. Obviously, water is very poignant because it's a very, very basic need, and not having water is just it's just an unbelievable crisis in just fulfilling your most fundamental needs as a human being, as an animal. And so it is really striking. But my point is that privatization is actually, the evidence shows that when previously public entities are privatized, it actually makes life much, much worse for the vast majority of ordinary people. So that's true of housing, as I was saying, and it's also true of transportation, schools, any other infrastructure. When it is privatized, actually it becomes much, much worse than it was when it was in the hands of the public, even under capitalism. So that is decisive. And as far as the question of water is concerned, under capitalism, obviously privatizing of water is disastrous. We saw what it did in, for example, in Bolivia, where there was an attempt to privatize the major sources of water, and it made people's lives so much worse. And in fact, there was a struggle. There was a real mass movement there, where the indigenous working class and indigenous poor were very much part of that movement. And we've seen many. I'm sure your viewers have seen documentaries about the protest movement in cities like Cochabamba, which actually forced the ruling class to change those privatizing policies. So every example of what any resource being privatized is bad, and it's bad for the working class. It's the reason it's done is because it is another avenue for profit for the capitalist class. That is the reason things are privatized. Privatization is not done to make things better, make lives better for the majority. It is done so that some other rich asshole can make more profits. That's why it's done. And that's one issue under capitalism. The other issue, as far as water is concerned, the explicit privatizing of water. But the other reason is also because the nature of capitalism itself, even when there aren't explicit policies to privatize water sources, the nature of capitalism itself is such that despite all the technological advances and innovation, the most basic needs of billions of people will remain unfulfilled, unmet, because capitalism is a system which in which all the technological innovation, all the way the resources are divided up, all of it is geared towards two things. One is making more and more profits for the world's wealthiest, and making their lives and the lives of a few more rich people under them much more comfortable. So, for example, in India, you have a situation where, even before you start talking about the climate crisis itself, which is obviously a big question that looms over us. But even before you get to that, the reality in India, for example, which is also a capitalist country, because every nation right now is capitalist in the in the world, except for a couple of exceptions which are slightly different. But you see, what you see is 600 million people, a large proportion of humanity in India, which does not have access to water because the normal process under capitalism is that for example, rich people have all kinds of water supply to make sure that their surroundings, the places where they hang out, are very green and verdant and beautiful, beautiful lawns, and make sure that they have everything. Versus poor people don't have access even to running water. And in fact, there is a 2024 study that shows that when you measure by household, even up to maybe 4.4 billion people, which is over half the world, lack access to safe drinking water. So this is the normal process under capitalism: lack of access to water, and then on top of that, you tag on efforts to privatize. For example, or like data centers that are being built across the nation, which are actually huge costs of water and energy. And that's also affecting the lives of working people here in the US, where you should not have any problems with water because it's the richest country on the planet. And so you see the normal process of capitalism. And then on top of that, the normal process also means things are getting worse and worse and worse for ordinary people. And so can I just say the idea of you can either have conservation or you can have abundance, that is such a destructive dichotomy in my view, because fails it fails to recognize in my view, these ideas, and it's also linked with degrowth and all of that. These ideas are linked. These ideas come from people, academicians or whoever, who refuse to tackle the real problem head on, which is a political problem. It is the problem of capitalism. Unless you overthrow capitalism, you are not going to be able to solve these problems. And the idea that you will go to poor people in India and tell them they need to conserve water is completely absurd. They already don't have water. So the message of not having abundance being given to the billions of people who already are struggling in scarcity is a complete non-starter. That is why you have to turn the tables on this false dichotomy and say, look, we both need to conserve and we need to make sure that everybody has a high standard of living. And the only basis on that will be to not have billionaires and multimillionaires, but a world where we can actually democratically control resources and devote those resources in a climate sustainable manner in order to deliver high standards of living for everybody. In other words, what I mean is that socialism would mean not all these jets and big mansions and lawns and yachts and all these for the billionaire class. It will also mean no more scarcity for billions of people. Billions of people will have access to safe drinking water, running water, plumbing, sewage, and all of that.
Just to clarify, for example, here in California, the debate between abundance and conservation is framed more in the following way, that it's based on a tiered, that there should be a tiered water rate. So if you're living in that rich mansion and you're using a lot of water, a lot more water than you need to use, you shouldn't get the same rate that the poor person pays. You should have to pay a lot more, and they should the ones who they can't even afford to water their lawn in the first place. They should pay a lot less, and that's basically the issue there. And so the abundance, the abundance theory here is basically that we can build these big projects. We don't need the conservation. We can just Trump's attitude.
Okay. Sorry, I
I,
misunderstood that, but I hope hopefully what I
no,
said.
no. I understand where you're coming from there, and you're looking at it more of an international, what's happening internationally with companies like Coca-Cola and all this stuff going into all that. But so that's what the issue is here, and it's about also how those rates are determined. For example, the two largest water agencies in Southern California, I'll bet this happens in other places in the country as well. Uh, these are appointed people, and their votes are counted, and they get each local water agency gets to appoint people to these larger water agencies that control everything based on income. So the higher your property value, and the more water you buy, the more the more say you get politically, the more votes you get, the more a percentage of the vote. The votes are a percentage, all based on the property value of the areas that are voting. So so that means that the people who can afford the expensive desal water, and all that, well, the poorer districts like around where I live, and they have to pay for it too. So we're talking about uh, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about environmental justice and environmental and economic equity or justice and so on. So that's part of the thing too. I want to ask you. I know I don't want to keep you much longer because I really appreciate the time you've spent already here, and it's about an hour here. So, um, can you give just some a few details about some of that struggle that you actually had to go through because you had to battle those Democrats. You had to uh, uh, and how advice you might give to people here in San Diego or wherever uh, on how they can go about it. What does the struggle really entail in terms of the reaction you're going to get too? I'm sure that you actually uh, fought off Jeff Bezos. That's pretty impressive, and all the other billionaires. So, what can you tell? I know a lot of Democrats down here were in the Democratic Party who would like to do something like that if they thought they could.
Well, are you talking about Democratic Party elected
I don't know
officials?
about anybody, but basically, how do you overcome these entrenched?
No. I'm asking you, the people who you're saying want to do something, is that Democratic Party elected officials or just
No,
ordinary
no,
people
no, no.
that
I don't
don't
know of
have?
any. No, I don't know of
You're
any
talking
elected officials.
you're talking
Maybe
about
one,
can I
possibly.
you're talking
Sorry.
about ordinary people who
Yeah,
identify as Democrats.
yeah.
Okay.
Or any ordinary people, but that's one example because I just say that because the Democrats are in control now in the South County.
Yeah, I mean, all of California is controlled by the Democratic Party. You have a
Right. That's
Democratic governor, and also in the desalinization struggle. I mean, it was Democratic Governor Newsom who
right.
one of the entities who was against the movement.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
regressive on his own environmental issues that he ran on. Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it shows you that the Democratic Party ultimately does not. I mean, they may have a slightly different rhetoric when in election years, but ultimately they are beholden to the same uh, ruling class that the Republicans are. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of advice, lesson number one is that if you think the Democratic Party is on your side, then you're going to lose. That's lesson number one. You have to, going in, you have to understand that the Democratic Party is, and this lesson is important for both Seattle and Washington State and for Southern California and California State as a whole, because we're talking about very blue states. We're talking about states where both Washington State and California have a Democratic governor, and the Democratic Party has a majority in both the state houses, the house, both houses of the state legislature. In fact, in California, it's even stronger that the Democratic Party has either a super majority or a near super majority in the two houses of the state legislature. So first, lesson number one is the Democratic Party is not on your side. If you're fighting for the working class, then know that the Democratic Party is as much your enemy as the Republican Party is. One of the fundamental reasons for why, with one sole elected office, we were able to completely turn Seattle's political history upside down is because we understood this. We understood that going in, and I specifically, that that I when I was elected, I was not elected to join the Democrats in administering the capitalist state, but maybe a little bit little bit to the left. No, I went in there understanding that my role was as a disruptor of the capitalist business as usual, and the only way that we were going to win any victories was on that basis. Lesson number two is if your movement has careerist leaders, then they will sell you out. You cannot have careerists who care about their own career and also have them actually put the interests of the wider working class ahead of everything else. Because I can promise you that if even whether you're elected or into city council or whatever, that's not the main issue. The main issue is if you are a leader of a movement and if you are actually fighting for the working class, then you will become effective in terms of winning for the working class, but you will also make a lot of powerful enemies. So this is what I have done is not the route to have a cozy career. I mean, there are a million ways in which I could have had a more comfortable life for myself. But that's the whole point. I'm not a careerist. That is why that is a bedrock reason why I haven't sold out and I don't plan to sell out because I'm not in this for my own career. I'm in this because this is the only avenue through which I don't mean electoral. I mean class struggle strategy is the only avenue through which we can win victories for the working class. So these are the basics that we understood, and this sets us apart from many, even well-intentioned people. Even well-intentioned people, when they come into any kind of issue and they want to push for it, they don't understand that the Democrats are not on their side. And when they're not willing to go against the Democrats, some of them I've seen, they do get it, but they say, well, I'm not going to take on that battle. I don't want that heat. Well, if you don't want that heat, then you're not going to fight for the working class because that the working class needs you to take that heat. That it needs you to fight for the Democratic Party, especially.
What about your organizing tactics?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. But John, you cannot talk about organizing tactics without understanding the fundamentals. If no amount of organizing finesse is going to save a movement that has any illusions in the Democratic Party, because they will find a way to crush the movement. That is what we have seen throughout history. So that's the first thing. And then building on that, yes, we do need organizing strategy and tactics. It's not guaranteed that you will win. And so, in order to turn that movement towards victory, you need a very effective strategy. And obviously, all of it has to be based on class struggle. But specifically within that class struggle strategy, you also need tactics to create what I call a credible threat against the ruling class. I mean, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, depends on the context. I mean, in Seattle, there is no Republican stronghold. So our opponents were the Chamber of Commerce, the billionaires like Jeff Bezos, and the Democratic Party. So in order to defeat such powerful entities, you have to create a credible threat. Because you have to understand that the status quo under capitalism is that the capitalist class and their political representatives, namely the Democrats and Republicans, they have all the power. And in order for us to win as the working class, you have to shift that balance of power in favor of the working class. And in order to do that, you have to mobilize and organize a mass of people, but in a way, in a fighting movement, not just bring them to City Hall and say, please, council members, do the right thing. No, the movement has to have a fighting character. Part of that is creating a credible threat, as I'm saying. So just to be concrete, in the Tax Amazon movement, not only did we bring the legislation, we publicly announced the legislation and said the city council should be voting yes on this legislation for the Amazon tax. In addition to that, and in addition to building rallies and protests and all of that, we also launched a ballot initiative petition for the Amazon tax. And we started collecting signatures. And we collected 30,000 signatures in 3 months at the rate of 10,000 signatures a month. It was enormous. This was during the George Floyd rebellion. So we went to the Black Lives Matter protest, and the rank and file of the Black Lives Matter protest embraced the Tax Amazon movement so closely because they were all they're all struggling for housing. This was meant to tax the wealthiest people in order to raise hundreds of millions of dollars every year for affordable housing, publicly owned affordable housing. This was a very popular issue among the rank and file of the BLM movement. And so we were able to collect 30,000 signatures in 3 months for an Amazon tax ballot initiative petition, which then became the credible threat. I mean, and the big business admitted this openly, that had it not been for the ballot initiative threat, they would not have conceded. They would not have, the Democrats take their marching orders from big business, from the billionaires. And so we won a near unanimous vote on our Amazon tax bill because there was a real threat to them that if they didn't vote yes on this bill right now, then the revolutionary socialists have a real chance of winning by doing a direct ballot initiative. So that's a real component of tactics.
Okay. Okay. And so now
Sorry,
let's say
I should go in the next 7 minutes.
okay. Okay. Great. So I'll finish with this question. When you win your race, how do you? What's the first thing you do to apply this organizing philosophy to Congress, which is quite a much more quite a stronger opponent or thing
Yes.
to deal with? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's nothing fundamentally different from between Seattle and Huntington on the on the one hand, and Congress on the other. But you're absolutely right that it is much it is that much more of a an ominous opponent. There's much more of a bigger opponent. And the truth is that if we were to get elected, and it's not guaranteed, we do have a shot at winning. That's why we need everybody, whether you live in Huntington or Seattle or wherever, you need to get involved in this campaign. We need your help. So please go to Kshama Sawant .org and get involved, and please donate to the campaign. But the truth is that if we win, it will be nothing short of a political earthquake, because it will be the election of the first ever revolutionary socialist to the US Congress. That is like in the belly of the beast, that is like really posing a threat to the whole edifice of the capitalist system, the politics of the capitalist system. And it will be nothing short of a political earthquake. And the flip side of that is that the capitalist class would see me getting elected to Congress as a nightmare scenario. They do not want someone like me in Congress, because they have seen what we have done in Seattle. They have seen that we are not available for sale. We're not going to get sold out. We're not here to build our career. See, all of this makes us a real threat. If you are willing to build a career for yourself, they can buy your soul for a few trinkets. That is, and by which I mean, like, if the the idea of climbing the rungs of the Democratic Party ladder is a very attractive prospect for a lot of people, which is why they end up selling out, like AOC. And so, but we are not there for that purpose. I'm running as an independent socialist. I've never run as a Democrat. So they have no they, meaning the capitalist class, has no obvious avenues to get us to sell out. And so they would see our election to Congress as a nightmare scenario. And that is why it's our obligation to actually make their nightmare scenario come true. And how we would use our congressional office if we did win is fundamentally, it would be similar to what we did in Seattle, which is not rely on electoral processes to win victories. It would rely on using our congressional office as a big platform, as a vehicle to mobilize working class people. So, one of the things is that I have pledged that if elected, I will turn my congressional inauguration into a mass rally of 10,000 people in Washington, D.C., and immediately launch campaigns to end all US military aid to the Israeli state, and to win free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich. And really, it will be. It will be. I mean, if we are elected, John, it will be international news. This news will go viral, and it will give us a platform to speak to millions of American workers. So when we won in Seattle, we got a platform to speak to tens of thousands of Seattle workers. We did that. We spoke to the working class, and we did a call to action, and that is how we were able to win the nation's highest minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and the renters' right. What the congressional office will offer us is a nationwide and possibly even international platform to mobilize millions of workers across America into action. And I do believe it can be done. If I'm not saying that there's a guarantee we will win. What I'm saying is that if we do win, I am very confident that this can be done, that using that office to build mass movements can be done. And that will immediately put pressure on the Democrats and Republicans. And it will create. See, what's missing right now, John, in Congress and also in the state legislatures and wherever, is an actual viable alternative. People always feel, okay, I hate Trump, but then you got to vote for the Democrats, right? Because it's the lesser evil.
So
They're
back.
not the lesser evil. Yeah, it's back and forth with no alternative. And it serves the purposes of the capitalist class to give you that illusion of debate, the illusion of difference that, oh, Democrats are slightly different than Republicans. If you're angry at one, vote for the other and keep flipping back and forth. But in reality, they are both servants of the capitalist class. And what's missing is an actual militant working class left alternative. That is why having even one such office in Congress will completely turn the tables on that illusion. It will break that illusion, and no longer will the so called progressive Democrats be able to say, well, we want Medicare for all, but we can't do it. We want $15 an hour, but we can't do it. There will actually be one Congress member who says, yes, we can fucking do it. Let's build movements nationally, and let's expose the Democrats and Republicans for what they are, which is stooges of the capitalist class. Sorry for my language.
No, that's all right. Uh, it's very popular in the campaigns today. That's great, and thank you very much, Kshama Sawant, and good luck, and thank you for your time. And I'll send you an email when it's up.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. And please be in touch.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Bye bye.